welcome to the CEC Report for the 10th of June 2016. I'm Elisa Barwick and joining me today is Craig Isherwood, CEC leader. Welcome, Craig.
Thanks, Elisa.
And on today's show, why the political establishment fears the CEC, and will Australia pursue alliances for war or development? So firstly, why the political establishment fears the CEC. Now, first of all, obviously the election is on, and today is yesterday was actually the close of nominations, and you're about to head off, Craig, to the draw for the election ballots at the Australian Electoral Commission. Yep. Tell our viewers about our slate of candidates.
Well, we're running a complete slate across all the states and in the Northern Territory. It's a unified campaign.
Yeah.
It's for the Senate, yeah, and we have 7 lower house seats in various, mainly in Victoria. And in New South Wales. So we have a unified team. We meet regularly via teleconference and so forth and discuss the campaigns, but I think all of our candidates realise the gravity of where Australia is heading right now, and as part of part of the nomination is really to give a unified sense to people in Australia about what the real issues are for this election, Elisa. Because I mean, John Howard made the comment that up to 40% of people will look away from the major parties. And when you look at the way the major parties structure their campaigns, they never discuss how they're actually going to fund anything.
No.
So when you start to, what we're starting to see and what people are starting to see is the same old of the promises for this, and every day they're dishing out millions and millions of dollars for this, that, the other thing, and people know very well, once the election's over, you've got an elected Prime Minister, whoever, then all the lies start coming in. Oh, we can't afford it, the economy can't afford this. And that's because the entire structure of the system is geared towards the policies of economic rationalism, of privatisation, of free trade, and basically geared away from the idea of what we promote, which is the idea of the common good. So what you have with our policy platform is we start from where you have to start. Now, if you want to have a coherent society with people that are fully employed, families that can be properly supported, childcare that's provided for where mothers want to work, good mental health policies. There's been a lot of discussion about this, where you're funding decent mental health, actually providing mental health. And of course, this last week I think there's been a big focus on mental health, but there's also basic hospital care. Now, the problem is under the existing structures, everything is becoming more and more privatised, where you have large companies that are pitting the shareholder profit against this idea of the general welfare, literally the healthcare of the population. So what we say is, first of all, you've got to take on the banks. You've got to stop the speculation. We've got a very heavy focus on the idea of bail-in, which is the global movement now of banks literally stealing people's deposits. And we just produced this federal election edition of the New Citizen, Elisa, which goes through defeat the Crown's killer bail-in policy, because this is law in the European Union and in the United Kingdom. It's already law in New Zealand, and this is the policy of the Financial Stability Board out of the Bank of International Settlements, is to get countries to adopt bail-in. Whereas when the next financial shock comes, and it is coming, the global financial crisis Mark II comes, then the banks can literally say to depositors, we're going to take some of your deposits. And despite all the smoke and mirrors here in Australia, at the end of the day, that still can be done in Australia. Despite the deposit guarantees of $250,000 and everything else you hear, that mechanism is still here. It's embedded within what APRA can do, the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority, and they can do that. So what we're saying is no to bail-in, no to the speculation within the banks. We have to have what's called Glass-Steagall, have a strong banking system which is separated out so the deposits are protected, and then commercial banking system, the boring banking as we talk about it, where you have just normal bankers that are part of the community that give the mortgages and the loans and so forth and provide that facility, that necessary facility for the economy. The other side, what we call vertical integration these days, where you've got stockbroking houses, insurance companies, merchant banking, investment banking, all part of this big conglomerate of banks these days, that has to be separated out and broken up. So you're not subjecting depositors to that. So that's our first policy. So you actually establish a real banking system. But then you've got to re-implement a policy that Chifley was trying to do back in the 50s of having a strong, he was trying to nationalise the banks back then. That failed because of the pressure out of the City of London at the particular time and the Crown through the Privy Council. That failed. But his policy was that the government should be controlling the emission of credit into the economy for important things like infrastructure development, supporting manufacturing, supporting farmers. The history that we have is all there. And what we're saying is we have to have a new national bank, a bank that controls these other private banks, a bank that then can emit credit into the economy for the purposes of literally funding large-scale infrastructure. And things like the ring rail proposal of Land's Endesby, and there's a high-speed rail proposal from Melbourne up to Brisbane, right, which is now coming into fruition. But when you talk about the funding from a government level, you also have to look at it differently, and we've proposed that we have to have what's called a capital budget. Now, a capital budget takes out all the necessary infrastructure spending out of the existing day-to-day budget of the government and puts it in a separate place and says we're going to fund this capital budget in a different way. And we would use the National Bank to create the credit necessary to be able to fund the building of hospitals, the building of schools, the building of high-speed rail facilities, roads, water projects and so forth. So you have a different idea. That's amortised over 25, 50, 75 years. So you're not, and it's not subjected to the same pressures as an ordinary operating budget of a government is, like paying salaries and other services and so forth. So that's funded through a Commonwealth Bank. And that's the essence of how you restructure the economy so that you focus the economy away from this speculative, parasitical system we have now into one that's fundamentally committed to the common good, to Commonwealth. And that's what our campaign's all about.
Yeah, you can see from what you've laid out why the political establishment fears the CEC, even without getting into the specifics of what happened on Sunday with a little attack in the Age, little but very pointed attack in the Age newspaper on Sunday, the 5th of June. But those policies comprehensively laid out, comprehensively developed over our 28-year history are a great, great threat to the establishment parties. What the Age said about us, they basically accused us of having a platform built on petty prejudice masked by an innocuous sounding party name and of targeting minorities, most recently Muslims, in an attempt to deflect blame for a host of otherwise complex economic and social problems. So we had just put out a press release about inviting more refugees to help build Australia, because we're going to need help with what you laid out. And this is just insanity. So they lie about us or they black us out because this is a grave threat.
And on that, Lisa, look, it's clear. There is no evidence. This is just a complete lie. It's a slander, and it's designed to, as you say, take the CEC out of the equation. What's the fact of the matter is we've got a population of 24 million people. We're a vastly underdeveloped country. We've said many, many times we need more immigrants to come in and support us to develop our country. Our policy is to say to people that are fleeing war zones and so forth, come to Australia, we will look after you, right? We will extend the hand of friendship, we'll give you a job, we'll provide for you through these infrastructure projects. Now, you're not going to do this in the existing system where you're talking about competing with privatised interests.
And we also expose the nature of the wars and the terrorism, the causes of that, which are driving people away from their homeland, which they obviously don't want to do in the first place. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that right after this break. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Will Australia pursue alliances for war or development? So we talked a bit about the possibility to develop Australia in that last segment, but look, we can't have it both ways. The possibility for development now lays in our collaborating with what China and the BRICS nations are doing, as we've said many times on this show. But at the same time, our alliance with the UK and the United States is seen as a threat to countries that are BRICS nations such as China and Russia. So First, we're going to look at the question of war, because there's a dramatic drumbeat happening at the moment, and unprecedented NATO exercises on the border of Russia, all along the borders of Russia. And this is part of a build-up towards the big Warsaw Conference of NATO on the 8th to the 9th of July, where they will establish 4 new battalions to permanently rotate through the Baltic states and Poland. Right now there are 4 major NATO exercises on Russia's borders, totalling up to perhaps 50 or 60,000 troops, and most prominent among them is Anaconda 16, which is in Poland and the Baltic countries right now.
Elisa, this is a real danger here, because you've got literally massive military exercises taking place on Russia's borders. Now, many people say, oh, well, the Russians are doing the same on their side of the border and so on and so forth. But see, what people don't understand, it only takes one mishap. It's not necessarily the planned issues, the planned thinking that's the problem. It's the mishaps, it's the misunderstandings that can take place during such complicated issues. And see, the insanity of all of this is that NATO should have been disbanded after the Cold War finished. In fact, that was the policy.
Was the promise, yeah.
There was a promise.
Well, it would not extend eastward, at least.
It wouldn't expand,
yeah.
Right? But over the last 20 years, you've seen a massive expansion, fostered by the Americans, into to basically the idea of containing Russia. And it's based upon this fallacy of what's called a limited nuclear war. That you can have, that the West has the capacity to annihilate and wipe out Russia's strategic nuclear arsenal without affecting the West. Which is that in itself is a complete and utter dangerous assumption. And President Putin has warned, haven't you watched lately about what we've been able to do in Syria?
Yep.
Launch missiles, ballistic missiles from halfway around the world, off ships, off planes, to travel around the Atlantic countries and hit targets like pinpoint precision in Syria. Haven't you seen what we're able to do? And he's countered this drumbeat by saying, look, this is exceptionally dangerous. And he just made a speech recently that we published in a press release, a very important press release that people should get off our website, to highlight, and there's many commentators, which we can't go through in detail here, have made it very clear that this is an exceptionally dangerous build-up towards an actual thermonuclear war.
Exactly, and some of it, just to give you the flavour of it, this is not just us warning about this. A defence attaché at a European embassy in Warsaw told the Guardian newspaper that the nightmare scenario of the exercise would be a mishap, a miscalculation which the Russians construe or choose to construe as an offensive action. The Spiegel newspaper in Germany said the alliance, NATO alliance, is going too far by playing out a real war scenario, and it risks actual war. John Helmer, who is the longest serving foreign journalist in Moscow, and he's an Aussie, had an article headlined, "The Red Line Crossed, in the crosshairs at trigger point, waiting for an October surprise." Professor Stephen F. Cohen, who's professor at New York University and Princeton, did a radio interview in which he said the NATO build-up on land, sea and in the air, on and very near Russia's borders, had no precedent even during the 40-year Cold War. He said, is this a mobilisation for a real war? Because it's not a Cold War. Professor Richard Sakwa, with the University of Kent and a Chatham House Fellow, said the West could sleepwalk into a doomsday war with Russia. It's time to wake up. Philip Giraldi, a former CIA military intelligence specialist, had an article, "How the World Ends. Baiting Russia is not good policy." And there was also a really stunning article worth reading in full by 3 US-based analysts of Russian extraction writing in the Vineyard of the Saker blog. And that was called A Russian Warning. And they say if there is going to be a war with Russia, then the United States will most certainly be destroyed and most of us will end up dead. And they mapped out the Russian experience, which was horrific in World War II, and how they will never allow that to be repeated. And they compared the technology of today, as you were outlining, Craig, to if they had had that technology at the time of Hitler's invasion, they would have killed Hitler and wiped out all the forces in 20 to 30 minutes. So it's a really stunning picture. Now, the US continues to impose this idea, however, that America is number one. Obama made a rant to an Air Force Academy event on the 2nd of June in which he said the US under his rule is the one indisputable nation in world affairs and sets the agenda at all international meetings, even if we're not there, even if we aren't hosting them. And the US Defence Secretary as well, Ashton Carter, at the Shangri-La dialogue that just took place at Singapore, he was even pushing a US-led NATO structure for Asia, but the good news is the Asian countries did not react to that very well, and most were much more receptive to China's approach of creating a community of common destiny. But Craig, look, Australia's main allies here are the ones that are pushing this conflict, both with China and Russia. What should our political leaders do?
Well, we have to take the same approach as like I was mentioning in the previous segment of moving away from these policies of globalisation, free trade and economic rationalism, which are the policies of the West, policies of the financial dictatorship of the City of London and Wall Street. What we've got to do is move towards BRICS, the Brazil, Russia, India, China and South African view of this idea that's elaborated by China of a community of common destiny. So what I'm saying is that we actually have to have a sea change here of policy, move away from the idea of the Asia pivot of the US and putting all of our eggs in the US basket or the UK basket, as the case might be, and move towards joining the principles of the BRICS countries. Now, that would de-escalate immediately our role in within Australia, within this region, right? But it illustrates for people that there is a different way of approaching this, that we don't have to have this what they call a zero-sum game. There's always has to be a winner and a loser. No, President Xi Jinping says we need the win-win solution, which means that everyone can win if you have this mutual collaboration. Now, that's not what we're getting with Obama. You know, it's not what we're getting with what Ash Carter just did, trying to establish a new Asian NATO. And this policy is, as reflected in what's taking place with the expansion of NATO, going to lead to war, whether through deliberate action or miscalculation. The problem is, the fact is you've got the infrastructure on the ground, so to speak, with these huge NATO exercises that can easily blow up the world, and you don't get a second chance with this. I mean, the number of nuclear weapons that the Russians have and the US have that are on a hair trigger that not necessarily can be stopped is absolutely frightening. So I think people have to really understand what the issue is here, and I suggest that they go to our website, get that media release, and actually get on to and look at what we've been talking about with this in our Australian Alert Service and our New Citizen.
Call in and we'll send you a package of information on our basic policies and election policies and so forth. Now we'll talk a bit more after this quick break about the alternative for Australia developing in conjunction with China and the BRICS. Welcome back to the CEC Report, where we're discussing, will Australia pursue alliances for war or development? So we were talking about shifting allegiances and beginning to have a cooperative spirit of win-win collaboration. And what we're already seeing actually across the globe is that the more that the countries across the BRICS, but particularly across the Eurasian landmass, are beginning to cooperate, the more their strategic alliances are shifting, just as a kind of a natural onflow from the work that they're doing together. So there's been some major shifts across the globe, which we'll go through just briefly. For example, Japan is reviving its collaboration with Russia and China and India for Eurasian development, and they've had some rather intensive collaboration just in recent months with Russia in particular. President Putin met with Abe on the 6th of May, the Japanese Prime Minister, and they discussed that the Japanese will invest in the development of the Russian Far East. Japan, the Philippines and Thailand are all increasingly indicating that they are less and less receptive to being bases for America to confront China over the South China Sea dispute, and this is something Australia should take note of. There was a meeting between Russia and ASEAN that took place on the 19th to 20th of May in Sochi, Russia. And it was headlined "Towards Strategic Unity for the Sake of the Common Good," and that really encapsulates the spirit of what's afoot here. It's not an anti-American or anti-Anglo-American thing. It's about common and mutual development.
I mean, the Chinese have been very active in trying to encourage America to join us.
Exactly.
Please join us. Yeah.
They keep inviting them to join the New Silk Road project and the AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. At this Russian-ASEAN meeting, they discussed a new trade zone between the Eurasian Economic Union, the Shanghai Cooperation Organisation and ASEAN, working as a part of the development of the One Belt, One Road strategy to link up the entire continent. There were dozens of bilateral agreements that were also signed between the ASEAN countries and Russia and each other. There are talks that are progressing between Moscow and Beijing about building a high-speed rail link from Moscow to Beijing. India has increased its collaboration with China and will remain non-aligned with regard to the US. India is looking at a major project to interlink and develop their river systems. And there was also a historic meeting between the leaders of India, Iran and Afghanistan on the 23rd of May, where they signed trilateral agreements to build the Chabahar port, which is in Iran. It's on the Gulf of Oman, and would open up direct trade routes to Europe, Russia and Central Asia for all the countries that are involved. And there are plans for trade corridors to link into that port. There's plans that India's looking at a deep water port in Bangladesh. And there's many, many more, too many to mention. But when's the last time we saw this kind of fast-paced development? I mean, you know, we've been fighting this kind of fight for 30 years and you've never seen anything like it. It's quite extraordinary.
We've heard no discussion of real foreign policy in this election campaign at all, at least. None of this is ever brought up.
It doesn't come up in Australia.
It just does not come up in Australia.
However, there is some good news, and that is there's a new body that was established in Melbourne last year by Chinese and Australian trade and business representatives, and it's called the Australian-China OBOR Initiative, One Belt, One Road Initiative. And it's promoting Australia to work with China to mesh in with this One Belt, One Road project. Now, it's advised by prominent Chinese and Australian businessmen and economists, and one of the Australian advisors on their board is the Orica chairman and BHP Billiton director, Malcolm Broomhead. And he told the Australian newspaper, he said, look, Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, invited us when he came to Australia in November 2014, which he did, to be part of this. He said, we are part of China's strategic thinking and we can access special investment and funding. And he named over 900 projects that have already been outlined. The funding provided by the New Silk Road Fund, the AIIB and the China Development Bank, if we just say yes to this invitation and get involved with it. The Darwin Port, which is being leased by the Landbridge Group, they've announced they're going to spend $25 million to expand their operation to create improved facilities for massive increases of export and import. But Craig, what must we do in Australia to really be a part of this and make it work?
Well, I think we have to get over the idea that somehow China's our enemy, because you constantly hear, you know, China's buying up all our land, China's doing this, China's doing that. In fact, a lot of it's not true. I mean, some of the European countries like Belgium, for example, has 10 or 15 times as amount of investment into our land as does China, for example. I mean, people don't know that, but this anti-Chinese sentiment is designed to stop us from having closer collaboration with the very country as one of our largest trading partners. It makes strategic sense to be part of because they're in our region. So we have to and not have this fear of this idea of participating in this win-win policy of President Xi Jinping. The One Belt, One Road project is ideal for us because we need massive infrastructure in this country. China's building tens of thousands of kilometres of high-speed rail, and we haven't got 1 kilometre of high-speed rail.
Exactly. It's just insane, and this would be a perfect election platform, which it is. It's our party platform. You can vote for Craig if you're in Victoria. You can vote for our other candidates wherever you are. Now, thanks very much, Craig.
You're welcome.
That's all we've got time for this week. Thanks for tuning into the CEC Report. Go to our website to find out more. Join us next week. You've been watching the CEC Report, the weekly TV show of the Citizens Electoral Council of Australia. What can people do to find out more, Robert?
Well, they can get on our website, www.cecaust.com.au, or they can call our toll-free number, Elisa, to order a copy of this, the Australian Alert Service, which is our weekly publication where we write up all the material we use. That number is 1-800-636-432.